We begin this morning with that breaking news we mentioned. Overnight on the war in Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin ramping up his attack despite a series of setbacks.
In a televised address overnight, Putin announced a partial mobilization of Russia's military, saying that military reservists are being tapped to help fight in Ukraine. He also appeared to threaten nuclear retaliation if Kyiv continues its efforts to reclaim land. Comes a day after Russian-controlled areas of southern and eastern Ukraine announced they are going to vote this week on joining the Russian Federation. We're going to begin with NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin on the ground in Ukraine. Aaron, good morning to you. So Putin's announcement comes as Ukraine makes major advances in the war. Some are wondering if this is a sign of desperation. What can we make from Russia's announcement today?
Hey, Joe. Well, Ukrainian and U.S. officials are certainly seeing this as an act of desperation. This is an extraordinary step to call up some 300,000 reservists. But I was just speaking to a Ukrainian official who told me that they estimate that Russia has lost some 100,000 troops in this war, whether that be killed, injured, or simply desertion, and that in order to continue, they would need to take this extraordinary step. He said that they do not expect to see the impact of this mobilization, though, on the battlefield for another month. It's one thing to call up these reservists. It's another thing to equip them, which Russia has been having issues with as well, Joe.
Yeah, that won't be a fast process. Let's talk about this other big development. 4 Russian-occupied regions in Ukraine have said they're planning on holding a referendum on joining the Russian Federation. So is this an indication that the Kremlin has made a decision to formally try and annex the territories? And then what are the consequences if Russia does annex these territories?
Well, in his speech earlier today, Russian President Vladimir Putin backing the annexation of those occupied territories. If that happens, Ukrainian officials see that as a new phase of this war, not because at that point, in the eyes of the Kremlin, they'll essentially be defending Russian territory. And President Putin, in his address, saying they would use any means possible, hinting at the nuclear option in order to do that. Ukrainian officials, though, are reading this as sort of a bluff of sorts. President Putin trying to warn off the West, scare them into backing down from their support for Ukraine. This Ukrainian official telling me he does not think, though, that is going to work, Joe.
And Aaron, I know you've been spending some time in a town that was recently liberated. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. We spent the last few days in the recently liberated town of Izum, Ukraine, where we saw firsthand the brutality of Russian occupation.
The strategic town of Izum lies in ruins after the Ukrainians pushed the Russian forces out, ending their brutal occupation. The trauma they left behind, palpable. For 6 excruciating months, Ukrainian investigators say Russian forces used the town's police station as a prison and torture center, keeping some 40 Ukrainians at a time.
In this room, there are 4 people.
They'd have 4 people in this cell.
In this small room.
Chief investigator Serhiy Bolvanov shows us the horrifying conditions he says prisoners were forced to endure. Some desperately marking the walls to pass the time.
9 days, somebody was there on this wall. You can see date, 29 June 22. This is named Lyoha. It's like Alexei. This marks God save us. Amen. And cross.
Ukrainian investigators say the prisoners were brought upstairs to be tortured, including civilians. He believes to terrorize the local population.
What goes through your mind as a human?
I'm a human at first, and when I see this place, it shocked me. I'm very scared.
Bolvanov says there's a link between the prison and the mass grave on the outskirts of town, where, according to Ukrainian investigators, they're exhuming bodies showing signs of torture. The Kremlin is calling the allegations a lie. Residents tell us most died from the relentless bombardment. Johan Krayev says for months his neighborhood was bombed. Missiles rained down from the sky night and day.
What is this?
It's shrapnel, he says. They were flying everywhere. Explosions were hitting everything. These are the scariest weapons. His wife, Antonina, shows us where shrapnel struck her arm and abdomen. The bombing was so powerful, their home was lifted off its frame. They had nowhere to run. All they could do was hide.
Imagine living in this basement for months. You have no phone, no internet, no electricity. In fact, this is your only light source. You're running out of water and food. At night, the explosions are so loud, you can't sleep. You don't know if your home will be the one hit next.
For half a year, that was the reality of the people who live here. But now, with Russians pushed back, people have left their homes, enjoying this moment of peace for however long it lasts. Erin McLaughlin, NBC News, Izum, Ukraine.
Ukrainian investigators tell me that they are now in the process of taking DNA samples from that prison and cross-referencing those samples with the bodies that have been recovered with signs of torture from the mass grave to try and piece together what happened to those people. They're vowing justice for each and every victim of Russian aggression. Investigators say it's very clear what Ukraine is fighting for in this war. Joe.
All right, Erin McLaughlin covering all aspects of the war in Ukraine. Erin, thank you. President Biden's speech today at the United Nations is taking on new urgency given Russia's announcement this morning. The president is expected to use the forum to rally support for the war effort in Ukraine.
NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee joins us now from the UN. Carol, good morning to you. So what kind of response can we expect to hear from the President Biden today on Russia's announcement this morning? Most likely they're fine-tuning that speech with all these developments.
Yeah, that's right. You can expect that the president's going to have to address Vladimir Putin's most recent comments in his speech. The speech was already slated to be very focused on Ukraine. We heard the president's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, previewing some of that, saying that the president would offer a firm rebuke of Russia's what they call unjust war in Ukraine. And so it was going to be a real centerpiece of his speech already. And now he can use this, what Vladimir Putin has recently said, to rally the world around a response against Russia and to unite for Ukraine. That was something he already intended to do, and this really emphasizes that. Now, one thing worth pointing out is that in the president's interview that aired on 60 Minutes on Sunday, he was asked this question about how the U.S. would respond if there was going to be some sort of nuclear response from Russia. And he said that the U.S. would respond strongly while also not outlining exactly what the U.S. would do, saying it would be proportional. Now, one thing to look for is whether this is just words or if there's U.S. information that Russia is actually moving assets or taking actual steps towards doing something like this. So that's something else to keep an eye out for. But certainly the president was already going to use this speech to try to rally the world, to continue to stay focused on Ukraine, to continue to isolate Russia. And this will really just further emphasize that.
And Carol, this is the first time the General Assembly has met in person in 3 years. So for President Biden in the U.S., how important are these actual face-to-face conversations with other world leaders as they try to maintain unified support for Ukraine?
It's a great question because it is the first time a lot of these leaders have seen each other in a forum like this, and it's important to have those face-to-face conversations. The president will have several that are planned. He's going to meet with the UN Secretary General, and one of the things we know he'll say in his speech is to emphasize the importance of a strong UN, of strengthening the UN, particularly when it comes to issues like Russia. So that'll be a meeting where he can further emphasize that. He's going to have a one-on-one meeting with the new British Prime Minister, Liz Truss. So that's been Britain has been a key ally for the U.S. in the war in Ukraine, and so that you can imagine he will use that moment to make sure that there's going to be continuity there with the new leadership in the U.K. And then there's just a lot of what happens here is on the sidelines. It's those informal conversations. The president's hosting a reception tonight, and he'll be seeing other world leaders on the sidelines, on the margins of these more formal meetings. And so that's where a lot of that face-to-face interaction can potentially have payoff when it comes to something like what the president's trying to do here, which is to get the European leaders in particular and other world leaders to really stick with the plan to isolate Russia and back Ukraine.
All right, Carol Lee at the UN in New York. Carol, thank you.
And joining us now for more insight is Andriy Dobryansky. He's from the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. And Andriy, good morning. Thanks for joining us. As we heard that Russian President Vladimir Putin mobilizing his citizens to defend the country by, quote, any means. So what are the effects of those remarks on Ukrainians on the ground?
I think a lot of them hear it as a bluff, even though President Putin specifically mentioned that this is not a bluff. This morning's Telegram channels all over Russia and Ukraine were all mentioning about the flights that have been booked out of Russia to Istanbul, to other places. So we saw this at the beginning of the war against Ukraine in February, people traveling across the border into Finland and other places. Now even more Russians of means are leaving the country. And we also know there's a mobilization within Moscow itself with police officers and warrants going door to door and searching for those men under the age of 35. But frankly, it's a mobilization, as far as I understand, up to the age of 55. So.
Let's talk about these planned votes now in these 4 Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine to formally join Russia. Why do you think Russia is pressing ahead with this right now?
We saw the same thing in 2014. So when Russia invaded Crimea and the other areas of the East in 2014, there was an initial announcement that there would be a referendum in May of that year. That referendum ended up happening in March because of what Russia saw as far as Ukraine's response militarily, those volunteer brigades actually stopping Russian forces from coming in further. Similarly, now Ukraine has another counteroffensive that's winning, and so Russia is speeding up its process by announcing these snap referenda. Referenda can't be done in a snap format. Scotland took a year just to organize. So these things, this is obviously not on an international level, nor will you see any international observers come in because you know how long it takes to actually travel into Ukraine since there's no flights to those occupied territories.
And yesterday during a White House briefing, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had this to say about the referendums.
These referenda are an affront to the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity that underpin the international system and that lie at the heart of the United Nations Charter. We know that these referenda will be manipulated. We know that Russia will use these sham referenda as a basis to purportedly annex these territories. If this does transpire, the United States will never recognize Russia's claims to any purportedly annexed parts of Ukraine.
So what would you like to see the international community do to respond to these plans?
I think we're going to see it in the speeches today. First and foremost, President Biden this morning. Also the not pre-recorded, but the video message by President Zelensky this afternoon. So in both of those speeches, I anticipate 2 things. One, calling for international attention and international forensic experts to come to Ukraine, as we saw the report from Izium, the fact that we need to have more of those people. We have volunteer firefighters right now going through digging up graves. We need international help for that. The second thing, and I really hope that President Biden follows through on what his people are telling us, that they will start talking about why Russia is a part of the Security Council, as Ukraine has been doing for many years now. There's a Security Council meeting tomorrow. I think this is very much in line with what the rest of the world wants to see. As President Macron said, you can't stay on the sidelines anymore. You have to pick a side.
More to come with those speeches coming up a bit later today. Andriy, thank you so much. Well, turning now to Hurricane Fiona, strengthening to a Category 4 hurricane earlier this morning and taking aim at Bermuda. Fiona lashed Turks and Caicos yesterday afternoon as a Category 3 hurricane, bringing strong winds and life-threatening flash floods. Despite the storm's strength, officials say there was minimal damage to the islands and no deaths reported.
In Puerto Rico this morning, the cleanup process is underway after the hurricane brought a record amount of rain to the island earlier this week. A majority of Puerto Rico still has no power or clean drinking water. U.S. Health Secretary Javier Becerra declared a public health emergency for the island last night, which will free up federal funds to assist the island. But Senate Leader Chuck Schumer says a lot more needs to be done to make sure Puerto Rico fully recovers 5 years after the island was decimated by Hurricane Maria.
The situation is a disaster. Enough is enough. The Puerto Rican Energy Bureau must push PREPA and LUMA not only to restore power, but to once and for all create a distributed, more resilient grid, and we will back them up. These 2 agencies, PREPA and LUMA, cannot stand in the way once again, because you've seen by their inaction the disaster and the harm that has gone to the people of Puerto Rico.
And we'll have more on the recovery efforts in just a moment from Wanda Figueroa, who lives in Puerto Rico, and meteorologist Michelle Grossman will have the latest on the storm's track. But we start with NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez on the ground this morning.
Overnight, Hurricane Fiona strengthened into a massive Category 4 hurricane after lashing Turks and Caicos. Now, here in Puerto Rico, a massive recovery effort is underway as more and more residents start to get their power restored. But still, 80% of this island is without power. About half is without drinking water. The governor here says that he hopes that restoration will continue over the coming days and won't be anything like the months that it took after Hurricane Maria to get power restored. And we took an aerial tour of Puerto Rico yesterday and saw that thankfully the floodwaters had largely started to recede in many parts of the island, but still some remote areas remain inaccessible after roads were washed away. Now, residents are starting to return to their homes after being flooded out when Hurricane Fiona made landfall on Sunday, but this recovery effort will take quite some time. And in the Dominican Republic, more than 1 million people are still without power there. Hurricane Fiona is being blamed for at least 5 deaths throughout the Caribbean, either directly because of the storm or in its aftermath.
Some devastating numbers there. Gabe Gutierrez, thanks.
Let's bring in Wanda Figueroa for more. She lives in Puerto Rico, is also a volunteer for Team Rubicon. That's the rescue organization made famous in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Wanda, good morning. First and foremost, just how are you doing this morning and how's your family doing?
Everyone is doing well. Thank you so much. We just got power yesterday.
You did just get back power. I mean, what's the scene like around where you live right now? And what are some of your relatives also experiencing?
No power, no water, but everybody's safe. It wasn't hit as bad as the South and the West.
And what are you hearing from people in the West, in the South?
Well, we have not gotten there yet, so we're not really sure what the state is like.
You volunteer with Team Rubicon. That's the international organization that really specializes in disaster response. Tell us a little bit about the response so far, and what is it you're hearing people need help with most urgently right now?
Well, what we do is we serve global communities before, during, and after disasters. We try to get the homeowners back into their homes as quickly as possible at no cost to them. And we just need to meet with community leaders to find out what their needs are.
You're dealing with floodwaters right now. How big of a challenge is that throughout the country?
I'm sure it's going to be challenging, but we'll make it through.
We've also seen these shocking images of gas lines in Salinas, Puerto Rico. That's one of the hard-hit areas on the island. Much of the island, of course, without power. You just got your power back. But with that, access to gasoline so critical to keep the generators running. Can you talk to us about the challenges of getting gasoline in some parts of the island and just how expensive it is on the island right now?
Gasoline has pretty much gone down quite a bit. However, the lines for gas are a little long.
All right. Wanda Figueroa, thank you so much for joining us. We're glad that you have power back. We're thinking of you, your family, and everyone there in Puerto Rico.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
All right, let's get the latest on the storm and find out where it's headed.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us now with the latest on that. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning to you both. And yeah, we're looking at a very strong storm, a Category 4 storm. That came at 2 o'clock this morning. It's going to continue to strengthen over the next 48 hours and still remain a very powerful storm as it heads towards Canada. So pulling away from the Turks and Caicos, but not before dumping lots of rain, really fierce winds. You can see from these images, the trees practically bent in half. We saw trees coming down, roads being flooded, and we also saw really high surf. So this was a dangerous situation yesterday. Dominican Republic, we saw a lot of damage with life-threatening mudslides, life-threatening flash floods, and that's going to be a problem as we head over the next few days. It's swirling over the Caribbean. It's really warm. It's going to continue to strengthen as we go throughout the next couple of days. Let's show you what's happening right now and then what we expect to happen. This is the latest, a Category 4 storm. That's a strong storm with winds at 130 miles per hour. These are sustained winds, so we're seeing winds gusting higher than that. It's moving painfully slow at 8 miles per hour. That's been part of the problem, just dumping a lot of rain because of that movement. You can see that well-defined eye. It's almost that picture-perfect hurricane, a textbook hurricane. So as we go throughout time here, we're going to see it strengthening over these really warm Caribbean waters. We're looking at a tropical storm watch over Bermuda. That's where you see the yellow. That means there's tropical storm conditions expected in the next 48 hours. So most likely being upgraded to a warning in the next 24 or 36 hours. So tracking it for you, a Category 4 storm now, expecting it to stay a Category 4 storm, but expecting it to strengthen. So notice the winds are at 130 miles per hour right now. Thursday into Friday morning, we're expecting winds at 140 miles per hour, again, sustained. So as it passes by or over Bermuda, the current track showing us that it moved a little bit further to the west. That's better news, but still it's a little too close for comfort with that cone of concern. So we're going to continue to watch this track over the next couple days, next 24 to 36 hours. And then notice it stays really, really strong. The North Atlantic has been so warm all summer long. There's a marine layer in place, and that's keeping the ocean waters warm. So we're going to keep this storm strong, too. It's got to enter Atlantic Canada as a very strong storm, a historical storm with a pressure that they probably have never seen before. So taking a look at the impacts for Bermuda, we're going to see, again, the track shifting a little bit further to the west, but that could change over the next few model runs. And we're going to head towards Thursday into Friday. And then do expect it to stay well away from the East Coast, but still dangerous beast. Also rip currents, so stay out of the water if you can. Damaging winds, torrential rainfall, massive seas, widespread power outages possible. We're going to see trees down as this enters Atlantic Canada, and that would be over the weekend, so that will be a big story. Now, we're going to talk about severe storms in portions of the Great Lakes, more record highs in portions of the south, a flood risk in the southwest. We have tropical moisture moving into the southwest, and we're going to see more showers and storms in Florida once again today. So starting with the severe threat, we're looking at 20 million people at risk, winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. Could see some damaging hail as well, an inch or larger. A few tornadoes are possible. We're not expecting widespread tornadoes, but still tracking the chance of a few. And where you see this yellow shading, that's the likeliest spots. So Watertown, New York, Buffalo, Erie, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, into Ohio, Cleveland, Columbus, and then we're also talking about Indiana as well. Ahead of this front, it's really warm, it's hot, it's humid, so this cold front's moving through that air mass, and that's why we're going to see the potential for some storms. We're also looking at the potential for some record-breaking heat. Little Rock today, 100 degrees. That is 16 degrees above what is typical for this time of year. 99 in Nashville, 19 degrees. So any of these temperatures are anywhere from 5, 10, 15, even up to 20 degrees above what is typical for this time of year. It's a big area of high pressure just bringing in this heat. Tomorrow, we're going to see the ridge break down a bit. That's going to be better news in terms of the temperatures, but still some heat in portions of the deep south, the southeast. Charlotte, 93 degrees, 93 tomorrow, 14 degrees above normal. Memphis, 89, 97 in Montgomery. And remember, fall does begin tomorrow at 9:04, and then just right on cue, that cold front comes through, and look at these temperatures by Friday in Philadelphia, upper 60s, 70s on Saturday, Boston 50s, 66 on Saturday, 69 on Sunday. So it's going to have a really fall feel as we head towards the later part of the week into parts of the weekend once that cold front does come through. So taking a little peek ahead towards the weekend, it's never too soon. Staying hot in portions of the south, warm sunshine in California, and that fall feel, you guys, in parts of the Great Lakes, the Mid-Atlantic, the Ohio Valley, and also the Northeast. Back to you.
It's exciting that fall is actually bringing fall weather. How about that, Michelle?
I agree.
All right.
Pumpkin spice lattes for everybody.
Exactly.
That's right. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.